Hi, this is Joe Bolen, and welcome to learning about VisualBasic.net. In the last video that I created, we talked about creating a non-database demo program. Instead of using Microsoft Access or Microsoft SQL or Microsoft Local Database or some other back-end SQL relational database, we're going to create one that is just with a simple file. A lot of times we're not needing the complexity of a relational database. We're basically working with a flat file. And so using the concept of serializing a file to the disk is a good way to preserve the data so that between programs we can have that data out on disk, read it in when we start our program, then write it back out when we're finished with our program. It's a simple file, not a lot of complexity to it, but you'll see that this is one tool that you want to know about to implement when you don't need the full complexity and complication of a relational database as the back end to store and persist your data. So let's take a look at our program as we had it last time, and we'll learn a little bit more about how to do the actual process of saving and loading a file. Okay, I've got our program up. Let's go to our main form code, and let's talk about that. I'm going to make the text a little bit bigger for you on that, and we'll talk about our documentation first. Our documentation for this program, the image of the main form is that imgur on that at this URL link. And the code that I'm creating in this program and in the other one is at pastebin.com. In fact, you'll see out at Pastebin under my ID a number of source code for different programs I've written. And the videos are out at youtube.com at Bolen Presents. So if you'd like to pause your video at this point in time, copy down these links, and then later on go out and study the code or download it and try it out yourself. Okay, let's get into the actual processing of this and learning what we have done thus far as a review, and then we'll come back and actually finish up by creating two different files, an XML file and a binary file. Okay, at this point we have, let's go back to our designer here. We have our DataGridView that we brought across after we created the contacts class. Now the contacts class was just a simple auto-implemented class on that we worked with, and we brought that in, bringing the different properties that we needed. We had a simple constructor on that, the default constructor, and then we created a parameterized constructor as well, just to reinforce our understanding of classes. Now this class has to be instantiated, so we create a contact, and then we're going to create a series of contacts and put them into a binding list, which is a collection of our contact. So the binding list is going to be the collection repository for all the different contacts we add. Now we will not actually issue a contact new kind of constructor. This will be done through the binding source automatically as we process this, which is what makes this such a nice, simple, easy to do program. Okay, one of the things I'm going to do right off the get-go as we begin this is I'm going to introduce serializing right here in our code at the top. This will allow us to do the rest of the project. I can forget about it. So I've got that into the top of our code and makes our whole class serializable. Okay, let's save that. Okay, let's come back to our main form and talk about it. In the main form, we have our binding navigator to our contact, and we also have our data grid view, which is linked up to our contacts through the contact binding source. So let's take a look at that. Here's our contacts binding source that came in when we dragged and dropped from our data source. So again, we dragged and dropped over from our data source. And basically this grid for its data source down here, let's scroll, get the data source, is the contact's binding source. And so what we're going to do is take our collection and we're going to take this binding source and its data source will be the collection. And then this binding source will then be attached to the data grid. And that'll create what's called data binding between the Windows form and all its controls and the data behind it. Okay, let's go also to remember that we went into the smart glyph here and we docked it on that. So it's docked in parent. We also enabled column reordering and we did some editing of the columns. And one column I left purposely undone was the contact ID, which is our pseudo primary key. And what I want to do is remind you we can change the header text on that. I'm just going to change it to ID on that, and I'll change how it's displayed, but the data property is still contact ID below. Now this one also we've made as read only as true because we don't want the user to change the contact ID. We're going to do that through our high water variable that we're going to protect. We also did some changes to our date of birth. We changed our default cell style, hitting on the ellipse, and we changed that to this format of the D for short date. And we changed the gender one to a combo box. We changed the column type to combo box. Then we came up to the collection, hit the ellipsis, and did our editing, adding M and F for male and female, left with a blank in case we didn't have that information at the time we were entering the record. And then we also changed the style up here in the display area to a display style of combo box. Okay, so that gets us all set up with our data grid. Then we went to our code. Come back here to our code, make it a little bit easier to see. One of the things we did was we had two different private variables added in. We created already the user class contact, but now we're creating a collection to hold all our contacts. And that kind of collection we're going to be using is called a binding list. Now the binding list is part of the system component model namespace. So that's why the import statement is up at the top. And we're going to call this contacts, plural, because it's a collection of the contact. We also have a variable called high water, which represents the highest value of the contact ID in our collection. Now, during the load event, we wanted to make certain our column headers were bold, so we put that part of code into the coding of the form load event. We also then took the collection, our binding list, and we assigned it to the data source of the contact binding source. Now remember, the contact binding source is then assigned to the data source property of the data grid. So it's sort of like a three-way connection, but once we do that, it all links together, and so we have what's called data binding on our Windows form. Then we went through real quickly our contacts to look at every contact, and we set the high water mark to the highest value in our collection of contacts. Then we went in and we validated our code with the save item on the navigation bar. And for any place where we had a zero value for contact ID using our lambda expression here, we then updated it with the a new high water mark into the contact ID. So basically, we're taking care of tracking our own primary key. I'm going to call it a pseudo primary key. It's not really functioning as a specific primary key for our processing. Then after we did an end edit, which binds the data or flushes the data into the different fields. Then we wanted to reset the bindings, and that refreshes the data grid with the values. And the false here is because we do not need to worry about the schema itself changing. So we use the false value. One of the things we wanted to validate also is that the last name not be blank. Now we could add other things in here to check if we wanted to, but I'm only worried about the last name for this demo. And so I looked at the column index, and if the column index had a data property name of last name, then I'm going to check to see if I have a null or white space or a empty value for my formatted value of that particular cell. And if I do, then I'm going to turn on the rows air text saying last name is a required value. And by setting eCancel equal to true, I force the user to stay in that cell till they enter in data. Otherwise, they have to hit the escape key, which this block of code takes care of, and it takes care of wiping out the air text and reverting back to the data that it had prior to trying to enter in values. So this is our simple part. Now the cell validating and the cell end edit are two areas that you need to have probably for most data grids that are doing maintenance when you're adding or you're modifying information on that. If you're not doing any modifying or adding, then these particular areas do not need to be in your code. But since this is a maintenance program, we want to make certain that we have a valid last name entered in, and then also we're taking care of the new contacts with updating the contact ID with the new value. Okay, so that is basically our program. It runs pretty well, but we have no way to save the information. So now let's introduce a way to save our data as we exit the program and load the data as we come into the program. And to begin that process, I'm going to put in a couple of import statements to make it a little bit easier to code this. And what I'm going to be doing is, since we're working with the writing out to a file, I'm going to do imports system IO on that. That'll take care of one thing we're going to deal with. And we're going to be dealing with a binary file to begin with. So I'm going to do an imports system runtime serialization formatters binary into our import statement. And then also, for the possibility that I might have a permission problem accessing the disk or reading the file or maybe some other area, I'm going to do an imports of the security. This will make it easier for me to code against as I'm processing. And we'll see these go dark as I actually make reference to them in my program. Now let's come down to the area of our private class level variables. And I'm going to code in a file name that we're going to be using. So I'm going to use a constant, which means it will not change during the run. And for constants, we name it a little bit differently. On that, we make it sort of shouting. So I'm going to call it bin data file as string. And I'm going to make it equal to contacts bin for binary file. And that'll get that part set up for us. And now we're ready to start coding in where we need to do the save and the load. So as we come into the beginning of our program, before we can assign contacts, we're going to have to read it in from the disk. So I'm going to do a routine here called bin load contacts. Okay, we'll create that subroutine in a minute. So we're going to create a bin load contacts routine to get the information, and then we're going to assign it to the data source. And then on the form closing, when we end the program, as the form is closing out, we want to do a bin save contacts. There we go. That takes care of that for saving. Now let's go to the very bottom of our program and add those two areas. So I'm going to do private sub bin save contacts. And I'm also going to add the routine for the load. Okay. In fact, I'm going to reshuffle these around here real quick. Make it easier for me to follow my own notes. There we go. So we're going to load and then save in these particular routines. Now we've got to set up that process in our routine. And what we're going to do here is set up our processing. And for the load of contacts, we want to use a stream reader type approach. So I'm going to get a little space here. We're going to use using stream as stream coming from the file IO namespace equal to file open, and then I'm going to put in my file name, which is bin underscore data file, and the file mode is going to be for this one as open or create. So I'm just going to click on that in my IntelliSense. And by using the using versus doing a dim of the stream, I'm able to take care of the file closing and opening and disposing all in one area. Once I leave the scope of the using clause block here, everything's disposed of correctly and I don't have to worry about the resources. So I've got my stream declared. Then I'm going to declare a variable called bin as new binary formatter on that. Now we want to take a look at the string length on that if I'm loading it in, because it may be that I'm creating a brand new file and there's not any data in it yet, so I don't want to process any further. So I'm going to say if stream, spell right here, dot length is greater than 0, then, not O, 0, then, okay, then we got something to process, and what we're going to do is we want to get our contacts. So I'm going to load everything into the contacts collection by assigning it the information from my file. So I have to do a convert type on this, but I'm going to take bin dot deserialize, and we're deserializing the stream, and then I'm going to convert that to a binding list of contact. There we go. And that takes care of everything there. Now, in reality, we're going to put in a little air catching in a minute, but we'll start out with this part. Now let's come down to our saving part on that. Now here's where I want to first take a look at my collection and make certain I have any rows at all in my collection. If I don't have anything there, then there's no purpose to try to save. So I'm going to take a look at contacts, take a look at the count, And if it's greater than 0, then I'm going to do some work. Otherwise, I'm just going to pop on out of the subroutine. I forgot the if in front of it. There we go. There we go. If then, there we go, is our end if. Now what we're going to do is, once again, we're going to basically grab this area up here. It's very similar code. We'll drop it in down here on that. This time though, it's not going to be open or create, it's going to be create, because we're going to create a brand new file and we're going to overlay the old file. And once again, I need the bin new binary formatter. At this point, all I need to do, I can take this part out now, because we're not reading it in, and I'm not converting, so I'm going to take that out, and I'm going to take this out. We'll see what I'm going to end up with here in just a second. We're going to deserialize that, or so I was going to say we're going to serialize it, not deserialize it. We're writing it out. So we're serialize, and I've got to put in what we're serializing, which is the contacts. And that is all that's necessary for that process. Okay, let's see if this works, and hopefully we'll end up with our file being written and read from as we process the program. So let me set this up. We'll hit start. And here comes in our data grid. I'm going to put my last name in first name. So Joe Bolen. I'm going to also put in Kathy here. Okay. I'm going to hit the save. Our ID's updated. I'm going to now close out the program. And if everything works correctly, we'll write things out to our file. Okay, no errors. Let's try to start up the program and see if the data's there. And sure enough, there's the data that came back in. It worked perfectly. Let's take a look at what it did. I'm going to exit out of here. I'm going to come over here to the Solution Explorer. I'm going to drill down to the binary debug area on that, and I've got the Show All Files button highlighted. I'm going to do a refresh. You'll see there's a contacts bin that was written out there. I'm going to open this one. You'll see that there's a lot of what's called metadata in front, but our actual data down below is being stored out onto our disk. And this becomes a very small file. It's not really what I call human readable, at least not without a utility. This is good for storing data quickly to a disk and then retrieving it back in. So this is our binary file using the binary serialization of a file. Okay, let's do now the XML version. This would be where we need to have a more human readable type of file that I maybe could edit outside the environment, and also take care of a remote type of file location where I might have to go through a router where there might be some kinds of filtering. And a XML file goes through those kinds of routers and filters without too much of a problem. So we'll add that one in. And what I'm going to be doing here is we're going to also deal with a security issue, which I didn't do in the example thus far. So let's begin by adding our new file. I'm going to do a copy of this line. And we're going to change the file from bin to XML as a constant. And our extension will be XML. So now we have a second file declared. Also, I'm going to add in the information to do the work for a XML file. And I'm going to do an imports system XML, and for this one we need to have the serialization. There we go. And that'll we'll work on in a minute. Now let's deal with some things we didn't do a minute ago. While I'm here, I'm going to do one other thing. I'm going to add, just for this program, because we're doing both types of files, I'm going to add a little switch here so we can turn it on and off whether we're working with the binary file or not. So I'm going to use bind switch. And we're now going to make this equal to false because I'm going to be working with an XML file. Okay. Now let's come down to our binary save area. What I want to do is look at that switch. If this is true, I'm going to do the binary save. If it's not true, then I want to do a new kind of save, in this case an XML save. Okay, so we changed this. We'll have to code this in a minute, but now we'll have the little switch to take care of that. Now normally in a program we're either doing one or the other, we're not trying to do both. And we need to do that also where we're going to be doing the load up here, and basically it's the same thing here. So I'm going to do an if on the load. If it's true, then we're going to do binary load, else we're going to do a XML load. And if. There we go. So we changed that on our loading and our saving on that. Let's now drop down to our code itself. And what I'm going to do first of all is add some error correction to our code. One of the things we want to do in this is to watch out for possibilities of exceptions since we're working with a disk. So we put in a try here, and then underneath we're going to do a catch. I'm going to do EX as exception, and then a in catch, in try I should say. And what I'm going to do in here is I'm going to do a message box show. And what I'm going to show is the message that I get from the exception. And I'm going to, since I don't know what kind of message I'm going to get, I'm going to do the get type and turn it to string. And then I'm going to have the message box OK button. OK, and the message box icons of error. And this is our general error catching routine, but I also want to have some specific, more user-friendly versions. So I'm going to take this line here and this line above it, do a copy. Then I'm going to come in here and paste in 2 times. First one I'll make it a IO exception. And this is a situation where I might have trouble on the disk. What I'm going to be doing here is changing the message to make it a little bit more friendly. And I'm going to have for this particular one a file access error. We're accessing file error. And for the next one, since we might have security issues, I'm going to look at security exception. Get the security exception. Here we go. Make this a little bit friendlier to the user. And in this one, I'm going to say security permissions error. Okay. I also want to do that for my stream on the save. I could still have problems there, so I want to put a try here. And we're going to put the same thing we had here. Copy and paste down here. And that'll get our error catching around our file I/O activities. Now we need to create our XML modules. So I'm going to have a private. I'll tell you what. I think what I'm going to do is just grab all this and copy it, and we'll do some renaming. Okay, I'll grab that, do a copy, come down here and paste, come back up and do a rename, make this XML load, and we're going to now use the XML data file, and we're going to not use binary, but an XML on that, and this one for an XML uses the new XML serialization. Serializer, there it is. And it takes on what it's going to be serializing. In this case, it's serializing the contacts. And we have to do a get type on that so it knows what type it's working with. Basically, it'll see it as an array on that. And in this case, all we have to do is change this to XML to take care of deserializing our particular stream. Everything else is the same. Then I come down here to our XML save. Whoops. XML save. And once again, we're going to use the XML file. On that, we're going to use the same format information. So I'm going to copy this up here and bring this down here. And the difference here is I'm going to be doing for the save just XML on that, and that takes care of that. So basically the XML requires a little bit different. Instead of using the binary formatter, we're using the XML serializer, and we have to give it the type of object that we're serializing. In this case, it's the binding source, the collection on that is being taken care of, and then we deserialize it using that information, and then we also serialize it with that information, taking the contacts and serializing it to a stream. So that takes care of serializing it. So with that being said, let's go back up and check to make certain we have everything set. We're going to be working with the XML because I've made this false. And you'll see that all of my imports now are being utilized. Let's see this run. Okay, start. Okay, there's our program running. We're going to put in Joe, Bolen. I'm going to come down here and put in Kathy again. And we're going to hit save. and then we're going to exit. No errors saving it. Let's start it up and see if we got that. And they came back in. Great. And that's what we wanted to have happen. Let's take a look at our file that we created here. So I'm going to come back over here to the binary area. I'm going to refresh it. You'll see now I have a context XML file. Let's open this one. And you'll see here's my XML file. It's a larger file. In one sense, it's not for this little bit of data we're storing, but it is a very simple file that allows us to go in, and in fact we can edit it very easily. We know how to take care of XML, but this is one that we can send over a remote system on that, as well as it being more humanly readable if we need to read it. But it is a larger file, so we have both versions, the XML and the binary approach to saving files. The binary will be a smaller one to work with though, and so you want to realize that there are trade-offs one way or the other. One important thing to remember is that I have to put the serializable in my class that I'm working with. So this is sort of like a pseudo schema, or in a sense it's a structure that we're using. We've taken care of binding it to our form on that with using the BindingList collection, and we process that very quickly on that. So I encourage you to try out this program. Let me run it once more so you can appreciate it running, and we're going to bring in our data on that, and we can enter in all the data we want. Now, one disadvantage, and I need to bring that to your attention, is that the BindingList can be sorted, but it takes some extra coding to do that. And if you find that you have a need to do that, that might be one area that you're going to have to investigate. There are some issues with doing that, but nothing that can't be overcome. This is when you have to start looking at whether I want to use a database or a data table instead of a simple binding list to hold our information. But when you think about it, we quickly created our class with all the information we needed in it. We were able to then hook up everything to the data grid with very little changes to the data grid. We had our editing and checking on that. And then the little bits of code required for serializing or taking care of processing the program down below. That's when you look at everything's happening between that using block right there. Very little code actually is running. The rest is to protect in case we have some problems on that, but there is very little code required to get things to work. So I encourage you to get your hands dirty in this particular program. Go out there to Pastebin, take a look at the code, try it out, go out to Microsoft Development Network and read more about serialization, about XML serialization and binary serialization. And also, if you're new to working with DataGrid, learn how to do the validating of the data grid if you're going to be doing an add or a modify of data in the data grid. Now, if you're just doing it as a read-only kind of inquiry screen, don't worry about learning that area, but you do need to have some validation of the data being processed. So these are some key things you need to learn and have as tools to your programming belt that you can pull out when you need to, or out of your toolbox when you need to. So get your hands dirty in the code and learn about how to use serialization for binary and XML files. It's a very excellent way to take care of things when you don't need the full-fledged back-end database kind of environment. Also, it makes it great for deploying a small program because you don't have to worry about whether the person has Microsoft Access or they have all the parts needed to do Microsoft SQL Server. Everything is included in this particular program with no extra things, so we can do a simple Xcopy deploy or a full-fledged click once deploy or more robust kind of deployment of our program to our end user. So it's a nice, simple program. It doesn't take much. I took my time showing you each step so that you're familiar with how to do things. But as you get your skills built up, it will not take you too much time to do this. You could probably have a program done within an hour to have this kind of thing done. So get yourself accustomed to how to deal with binary and XML files. Until next time, take care and get your hands dirty in the code.